heading west to the Far East. We fly into Boston on the 11th of May for a gig the day after at the Orpheum Theatre. Again, I was treading the same boards as my heroes. I had a Genesis bootleg that had been recorded at this venue, and it was a familiar name as soon as it turned up on the itinerary. From there, we headed back to Canada and a gig at the University of Montreal before 2 shows at Massey Hall in Toronto. Our popularity had increased and these Canadian shows were well sold out before we'd even started the tour in Europe. Whilst we were in Toronto, we visited a hat shop and bought a bag full of ridiculous headgear. There was a shit hat, a moulded rubber hat in the shape of a king-sized turd with a footprint on it. Another had a seagull on a piece of wire that bobbed around above your head. Another with a pair of hands on either side that could be clapped together by pulling a cord under the chin. And the most memorable was a hat with a pair of tits sticking out the front. We'd been to do an interview in a radio station, and when we came out there was a Canadian politician being interviewed on the pavement outside. Never missing an opportunity to wind somebody up, Ped keeps sticking his head into the frame, pulling a stupid face wearing the tit hat. We can see that the cameraman's trying to move to keep Ped out of the frame, and Ped keeps moving to stay in. In the end, the cameraman loses his rag, stops filming and shoves Ped, shouting, "You fucking jerk off!" Ped can't retaliate because he, like all of us, is cracking up. We all walk off and the interview resumes, and Ped shouting, "Hey, you fucking jerk off," continually over the interviewer as we walk away down the street. I'd pay a lot of money to see that clip. French John still has the hat collection hanging in his trophy room, even the shit hat. We return to Chicago to play the Aragon Ballroom and hope the night goes without incident and the dance floors stay intact. The Chicago crowd do not disappoint and the standing audience is up for it from the first bar. Wicked atmosphere, very noisy and enthusiastic. After the show, we're upstairs in the dressing room as the crowds are exiting the venue and we shout and wave to them as they leave. Somebody throws a t-shirt out and there's a mad scramble as it's torn to shreds. Within seconds, a small crowd had gathered below the second-story window and we start throwing more t-shirts out. It doesn't take too long before things get out of hand and people are climbing on cars and the atmosphere is getting a little volatile. We're called back inside and can hear the commotion going on, and then the sound of sirens indicating that maybe trouble was brewing. When we left the venue about an hour later, we see that the poor guy who'd parked his Volkswagen Golf underneath the window would need a taxi home. All the windows are smashed as the roof had been squashed flat from people climbing on it, and he'd definitely need the number of a good panel beater as his doors had taken a beating as well. Chicago, we love you. The 20th of May 1985 was the date of a gig at Constitution Hall, Washington DC, and also the date of my 22nd birthday. The lads bought me a blow-up doll. How thoughtful. It was thrown out of the window the following morning, and our minibus reversed over it, causing the head to swell to a ridiculous size before exploding with a bang. The gig was another big venue that was familiar to me, as it was the place where Eddie Murphy filmed his Delirious video. On our previous visit to the city, we'd hooked up with a Scouser. Well, he was from Southport, and he ran a club, so we spent the evening celebrating my birthday, and I was even given a birthday cake. The Psychedelic Fairs were also in the club, and I remember joining Richard Butler and John Ashton in a booth for a beer. This was a measure of how mad the last 4 years had been. I'd spent my 18th birthday watching the fairs from the audience, and 4 years later I was drinking with them in a club on the other side of the world. We returned to New York for 2 nights at the Beacon Theatre, stopping for a show in Philadelphia on the way. Fortunately, the stay in New York was short, so there wasn't a lot of time to go crazy as on previous visits, and with a large number of gigs in the pipeline, we'd all have to be a little bit more sensible. The highlight of this trip to New York was taking a helicopter flight over the city. It took off from one side of Manhattan, flew to the other side and out to the Statue of Liberty before returning to the island. Unfortunately, the Statue of Liberty was being renovated at the time and covered in scaffold. It was amazing to have a view that you only normally get in Hollywood movies, and to see the vast Central Park from the air was amazing. If you're there and you can afford it, then do it. I reckon it's the best way to see the Big Apple. We headed south through Atlanta and down into Florida for 4 gigs in Jacksonville, Fort Lauderdale, Tampa and Orlando. The latter 2 shows were at High-A-Lie Frontons. High-A-Lie is a game played in a huge court between 2 players, slinging a ball against the wall with the aid of a handheld basket. It's Basque in origin and claimed to be the fastest game in the world. Look it up if you want to know more. I'll always remember Florida for the ridiculous strength of the cocaine. I ordered a quarter at the first gig via one of the crew who had a connection down there and thought this would last until we left the state. Wrong. The night after the first gig I spent in my room with a bunch of the crew and we do the lot. As I said earlier, the party you never get to. More was ordered the next day and that was dispatched in rapid fashion too. Repeat process daily until you leave Florida and your hooter needs a rest. We fly to New Orleans and have 3 nights there with the gig on the final night. You'd think that a musician in New Orleans would have plenty of memories. I remember checking into a hotel, seeing a paddle steamer on the Mississippi, getting hammered at Pat O'Brien's on Bourbon Street drinking very large pink cocktails called hurricanes, and nursing the mother of all hangovers on a flight to Houston the next day. It was our first visit to Texas and the first time I'd heard genuine Texan accents. There's something about the southern drawl I really love. The venues we played in Houston, Austin, San Antonio and Dallas were not as big as in other places, but they were no less enjoyable. But we were all looking forward to the next gig in Denver. The Red Rocks Amphitheatre is a natural bowl carved out of the rocks on the outskirts of Denver. We knew about it from seeing the Tube's U2 special that was filmed there 2 years before, and it looked epic on the TV screen, and upon arrival we weren't disappointed. I don't think we'd played outdoors before, and to play in such amazing surroundings meant that we were all hyped for the show. The weather wasn't being too kind to us though, and the wind was whipping up from when we arrived for the sound check that afternoon. The stage itself was quite sheltered, but there was a section between the stage and the audience, where all the flash bombs were, that were quite exposed. We were disappointed that the huge fires we'd seen either side of U2's stage didn't come with the venue, so our own pyros would have to do. We reached the point in the set where they go off, just before the huh in relax. The point where we could all look at the audience for a split second and enjoy their reaction, but were hugely let down. There's a bang, the flash bombs go up, and they're immediately swept sideways by the strong winds. More of a damp squib than a big bang. We move on to Phoenix and check into another flash hotel. We have a day off when we arrive and I get to experience the hottest weather ever. The hotel had 2 branches, one in town where we were staying and one near the mountains just out of town. Ian Jeffrey had stayed at the other one before and told us it was the only hotel where he'd ever been in where you could hire horses and fishing rods from reception. We had no need for horses and spent our day lounging in the hotel pool that had a bar in the middle. I remember sitting up to me waist in water, sipping a strawberry daiquiri and glancing at the thermometer on the bar wall. 120 degrees. This was a different kind of heat though. It was bearable because there was zero humidity as we were virtually in the desert. I'm not one to tolerate the heat too much, but I gladly could have sat there all day sucking on my straw and chilling in the pool. We head to LA for the start of our journey up the west coast and begin with 2 nights at the Greek. When we took to the stage, I looked at the people who were in the first 6 rows and think that they look a little out of place at a Frankie gig. No Frankie Say t-shirts and not a lot of enthusiasm considering they were so close to the action. There was a woman right in front of me wearing what looked like a posh evening dress and her escort was in a tuxedo. When I inquired later about these people, I was told they had season tickets for the venue, which meant they got to attend every show and see it from the best seats in the house. Amongst them were plenty of showbiz people who'd been invited by Ron. I felt kind of sorry for the true fans who were shoved a few rows back, so when I left the stage the following night I launched a huge pint of Gatorade all over this woman in a posh frock. It was a bit mean, but hey, we're rock and roll, and they didn't appear to enjoy the show very much anyway. This is one thing I can't stand about festivals these days and this bullshit gold circle in front of the stage for the VIPs. You're at a festival, muck in. I think even Glastonbury succumbed and has a ring to enable the band's guests to enjoy the show without having to rub shoulders with the rest of the scruffs in the crowd. I think the shows are about your fans, many seeing you for the first time, and not your guests who've probably seen you play many times over. We play another outdoor show at Irvine Meadows. This was probably the biggest of the American leg of the tour. We were supported by local band The Untouchables, who had a following of surf punks, and during our set a number of these guys got carried away and invaded the stage. Security guys were flinging them off, and I was concerned at some of the rough treatment, but these guys were used to being battered by the Pacific waves, and nobody appeared injured or bothered. We move on to San Francisco, and Mark, Jed, and I have another meet with our relations. After the gig, we head into town and take our family to this very exclusive club on top of a hotel somewhere. We eventually get back to our hotel, wasted after beer, bugle, and bongs, and I end up passing out with my cousin's husband in my bed. Must have been a good night. We arrive in Portland, the home of Nike. This meant a huge shopping trip for everyone to the local Nike warehouse. We'd already had a couple of Nike shopping days on this tour, and this could be reflected in the clobber our crew were wearing. Most of them had been given trackies and trainees by the band, and we definitely had the smartest and most athletic looking crew on the road. I remember arriving back in the UK after this tour and declaring all this stuff at customs. The woman checking my bag obviously couldn't be arsed pricing up 20 pairs of shoes, t-shirts, sweatshirts and tracksuits, and was making up her own prices to make sure I came in under the limit. We played Seattle, then on to Vancouver for the last gig of the American tour. The show was at the University of British Columbia, and the drive to the venue was spectacular. There were amazing views of the Pacific as we climbed the coastal road. We were travelling to Japan from Canada, and we weren't able to take our lights as they were too expensive to fly over, but the stage set was going. We weren't allowed to transport any of our pyro stuff either, so Bomber Harris decided he'd get rid of as much of the surplus as he could at this last gig. He usually used 2 maroons at the end of 2 tribes, but for this gig he doubled up and added 1 for luck. The flash bombs we used during Relax were all doubled up, and when they went off it was pretty spectacular, more like indoor fireworks than stage pyrotechnics, but we weren't prepared for what was about to happen at the end of the show. 2 tribes ended with 16 crashes. On the first crash there'd be a couple of whistling fireworks that went off and sounded like dropping bombs. They would last for the 16 crashes, and on the last crash there would be the big bang from the maroons. The whistlers had been doubled and sounded great, but we weren't prepared for the bang that followed them. We hit the last note and the bang sounds like a serious explosion. We can feel the blast from behind us and Ped's nearly blown off his drum stool. There's a momentary pause while the audience absorb the travelling shockwave, and then there is a crash of broken glass as 56 windows around the top of the venue are blown from their frames and fall to the floor outside. I feel an insurance claim coming on. Talk about going out with a bang. When we go backstage, Bomber is being bollocked by Jake Berry, our tour manager, because the oil drum containing the maroons are being completely ripped in half. It was lucky nobody was hurt or even killed by some of the metal shrapnel that was flying about. We arrive at Vancouver Airport the next day to take the flight to Japan and walk into the biggest security operation we've ever seen. The day before, a bomb had been placed on a Canadian Pacific flight from Vancouver to Japan and exploded at Narita Airport, killing 2 people. Within an hour of this, an Air India flight was blown up off the west coast of Ireland, killing 329 people. Both incidents were related to Sikh terrorists based in Canada. Every airport in Canada was on high alert, and we spent what felt like hours waiting in line to have all our baggage thoroughly searched before it could be checked on board the planes. I can only imagine what would have happened to the crew if they'd attempted to take any of our pyros to Japan. I think we'd have been left to tune our own guitars.